Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the conference about Falun Dafa persecution in China, then and now, 21 years of human rights abuse. I'm your host, Mikołaj Jaroszewicz, and I will start with a presentation with a brief introduction into the subject. Let me share the screen. One moment, some technical matters.
Okay.
Okay, you should be able to see my presentation. So let's begin. So this will be a brief introduction into the subject. The presentation is called Falun Dafa Persecution in China, 21 Years of Abuse of Basic Human Rights. And here I will shortly show what is Falun Dafa. I will also show that the persecution is widely... You can hear me, yes? Okay. That the persecution is widespread. It touches all areas of life and all layers of society. Na pewno mnie słyszysz, tak? Słychać mnie? Okay. And I will also answer the question why the CCP persecutes Falun Gong so badly for so long. So without further ado, let's start. Falun Dafa is a traditional spiritual discipline that is based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. And it consists also on doing 4 gentle exercises and 1 meditation that are good for the body-mind. And it was introduced in 1992 in China to the public. Falun Dafa obtained many awards. Also, it was praised by the government. But then in 1999, persecution started of Falun Gong. So, sorry again, can you see my screen? No. Widać moi...
Yeah.
No? One moment. Sharing screen, okay. Okay. Okay, so actually in 1999, the persecution started. So why the persecution started? Why the CCP started to persecute Falun Gong? This is, of course, a complex question that is not easy to answer, but we can number a few reasons. One of them is the fear of losing control. The officials, the higher-ups of the CCP, they were actually in fear of losing control because a government survey in 1999 showed that the number of Falun Gong practitioners exceeded 100 million, which was much more than the members of the Communist Party. So the officials in the CCP, they feared of losing power. Another reason is that the guiding principles of Falun Dafa, they are actually totally incompatible with the communist atheist ideology of the Communist Party in China. And also certain communist officials saw the persecution of sole decision of Jiang Zemin in 1999. The persecution started with his known words, I will quote, "destroyed their reputation, bankrupted them financially, and destroyed them physically." So, one moment, technical matter. Okay, so one of the main institutions that was created to persecute Falun Dafa, I forgot to mention, Falun Dafa is also known as Falun Gong. So one of the main institutions that were created to persecute Falun Gong was the 16th office. So in a Politburo meeting on 7th of June 1999, Jiang Zemin gave a speech on the urgent need to deal with Falun Gong. And thus, 3 days later, the central leading group for handling Falun Gong issue was thus formed on June 10th, and this institution was known as the 16th office due to the date in which was created. So it's important to note that this institution was created exclusively and only to coordinate and carry out the suppression and eradication of Falun Gong. And 16th office is known as the Chinese Gestapo. What's important is that 16th office is secretive, it's illegal, there is no legislation that is establishing the 16th office, and there are no laws that delineating its powers, and it was created solely on the basis of the speech of Jiang Zemin 1 month prior to the start of the persecution. So 16th office has enormous powers. It's authorized to control all government departments and bodies at all levels. The examples of which is, for example, the police system. After Falun Gong, like the 16th office failed to eradicate Falun Gong in 3 months, like initially Jiang Zemin envisioned, he ordered to expand the 16th office to the Ministry of State Security, Ministry of Public Security, and also to all local police departments. Its powers, they extend also to the justice system. So actually, all the cases of Falun Gong practitioners are not decided by judges, but they are decided according to the instructions of the 16th office. Another important place where the 16th office is working is the education system. So the 16th office was established within the education, from the provincial level to the municipal level, from middle schools to universities, even in elementary schools. And another place where the 16th office is working are large companies, be it state-owned, but also privately owned. And each of such bigger companies has its own Communist Party committee. So it was only natural to establish the 16 offices also in those places. I will talk briefly about the persecution of youth and children of Falun Dafa. So actually, in the persecution directed by CCP against Falun Dafa, nobody is spared. So people all ages are persecuted, as well as very young, like children, as old. So children that practice Falun Gong, but also children who are simply members of families where somebody practices Falun Gong, they are also persecuted by the CCP. What's important is that not just practitioners, children are persecuted, non-practitioners too. All children are brainwashed at school to hate Falun Gong. And they are actually trained to be loyal to the CCP instead of being taught to think independently. So children of Falun Dafa families, they grow up in fear. Their families are destroyed by the CCP because, for example, the parents were condemned to very long prison terms, or they were simply killed by the CCP only because of practicing Falun Gong. Those children then become homeless, orphans, as I said, after parents are either in prison or they were tortured to death. And as they don't have any home anymore, they are forced to move from place to place to hide from police. They are also bullied and humiliated by classmates. that were brainwashed by the CCP into hatred towards Falun Gong. Those children are also expelled from schools, deprived of education. As I said, the CCP does not care about anybody in this persecution, so children are even detained and tortured. They are driven insane due to the enormous trauma that they experience. They can die of this trauma. They are even tortured to death. I would like to present a short story regarding the persecution of youth and children of Falun Dafa. This will be the story of Wang Shujie, and it's a story taken from the Minghui report, in the 20-year persecution of Falun Dafa in China. So I will read it. When Wang Shujie was only 2, she witnessed the police arrest her parents several times in front of her. During a police raid on December 3rd, 2000, the officer yelled at her father and slapped his face with a book. Shujie passed out from the shock and fear. After she came to, she had a fever and was sweating. She shook her head back and forth due to the severe pain in her head. She was restless and uneasy and banged her head against the wall. The police went to Shujie's home over and over again to arrest her family members. When her father was detained, she held a picture of herself with her father and cried bitterly. The police returned in less than a year, wielding batons, to arrest Shujie's parents again. She was awakened after having fallen asleep minutes before and shouted. Trauma and chronic fear led to a deterioration in her health, and she had difficulty eating and sleeping. For 2 years, she simply didn't grow. When Shujie was 4, the doctor found a benign growth in her brain. Shortly after she was operated on, however, she stopped breathing and died in July 2002. So this is one of the many tragic stories of children of Falun Dafa that I wanted to here promptly show. One of the important institutions that is used by the CCP to persecute Falun Gong is the education system. So schools were immediately mobilized by the CCP in 1999 when the persecution started. And here actually the persecution could reach the masses. What's important to know is that the entire education system is controlled by the CCP, from elementary schools to universities, and each school, even each grade, has its own Communist Party secretary that is monitoring each student's thought, if his thought is aligned with the party. So students who practice Falun Gong are discriminated, they are expelled from school. But not only practitioners are persecuted, non-practitioners too, as the anti-Falun Gong propaganda was and is added to the textbooks, and students are forced to defame Falun Gong in their exams, and those that refuse to do it, they are persecuted just as Falun Gong practitioners. One example of using the education system by CCP was when CCP was promoting 1 million signatures campaign, which consisted on forcing students of schools to sign statements that are denouncing Falun Gong, but not only students were forced to do it, as staff members of schools, and including retirees, were forced to do it. And people that refused to do it, they were either fired or detained in a labor re-education camp. So the situation of using the propaganda and education system to slander Falun Gong created a situation where over the past 2 decades, an entire generation was indoctrinated with misinformation that maligns Falun Gong, and they were indoctrinated into hatred towards Falun Gong. As I said, in my persecution, in my presentation, I want to show that the persecution actually touches all areas of life. So one of the examples is that practitioners can be fired from their jobs, but they not only have problems with employment, even if they have personal companies that they own, They are forced to close them. Their property can be seized, be it their finances, their material wealth, their homes can be ransacked, the house is condemned, making those people, these practitioners, essentially without a place to live, and they're forced to escape from police and move from place to place. Here on the right, we can see a painting done by Falun Dafa practitioner that shows a girl that just came from school, only to see that her house was closed by the 610 office and her parents were taken to prison because of practicing Falun Gong, making her an orphan and making her homeless. Yes. So not only young people, young practitioners are persecuted regarding their finances, old people too. For example, their pensions can be withheld of old people, making those people without any resources to live. And actually, practitioners live in a present-day Orwellian nightmare, in an Orwellian state that became a reality, and they face constant pressure of being targeted anytime and anywhere. One example is that the CCP, the police, can confiscate the passports of Falun Dafa practitioners and their IDs, or police makes a mark on their document that they practice Falun Gong, which makes essentially their travel, banking, or lodging, like essential things, very difficult to do or even impossible, restricting in this way their lives. Due to the development of modern technology, practitioners live under constant surveillance. They are monitored while walking on the street, where cameras with AI software can see who is walking and if practice Falun Gong. When they are checking into a hotel, making a donation, or sharing a social media post. So they really live under constant surveillance. So when a practitioner is detained by police, he is very probably taken to a brainwashing center. It's important to know that those brainwashing centers are actually illegal, and no legal documentation is needed to detain somebody and take him to this brainwashing center. And practitioners can be detained solely based on the reason that they didn't want to give up their faith. And the main goal of these brainwashing centers is to make practitioners to renounce their faith. This is done in the so-called transformation process, and the practitioners are forced to sign 3 statements. One of them is that the practitioner feels remorse for practicing Falun Gong. The other is that he or she promises not to practice Falun Gong ever again. And the third is that he or she promises he or she never again associate with any other Falun Gong adherent, and will not go to Beijing to appeal for Falun Gong. And they are said, those practitioners, that if they sign, then they will be released, but if not, then they risk torture and indefinite imprisonment. So what are the brainwashing tactics used on the Falun Dafa practitioners to make them renounce their faith? Practitioners are forced to watch constant propaganda that vilifies Falun Gong, and afterwards they are forced to write their thoughts, which are then analyzed by psychologists that are trying to find their weaknesses, and in order to crush their will, to make them renounce their faith. One of the brainwashing tactics is that even family members can be called to the brainwashing center to convince practitioners to renounce their belief. So if a practitioner renounces his belief, he is then forced to transform other practitioners to make them to renounce their faith. And this is done using force, threats, or financial incentives. So when in this brainwashing process, a practitioner does not give up his faith, then the CCP resorts to torture. And among many tortures used by the CCP is beating, force feeding, keeping in stressful positions, sensory bombardment, extreme heat, freezing, restricting basic needs, administration of unknown drugs, electric shocks, and many, many more. And the worst crime done by the CCP against Falun Dafa practitioners is live organ harvesting. So actually, the practitioners are having routine physical exams. Their blood is tested if their organs are in health, and also if their organs match with the transplant recipient. And if it is so, then such a practitioner is killed just for the sake of making this transplant. So the waiting line for organ in China is extremely short. It could be weeks, days, or sometimes even hours, which is impossible in a system based on voluntary organ donation. And it's possible only when there is a big bank of living people that can be killed on demand. So despite this brutal persecution done by CCP against Falun Dafa practitioners, practitioners of Falun Dafa still strive to clarify the truth to Chinese people. They clarify the truth that Falun Dafa is good, that truthfulness, compassion, forbearance is good. And they do it because the Chinese people were simply deceived and poisoned by the CCP's propaganda. So one of the projects, many projects used for truth clarification, is that practitioners, they create underground printing facilities, which are of course illegal, and it's very risky, where they manufacture truth clarification materials, like for example flyers, CDs, banners that are then put on the street. But practitioners also clarify the truth person to person, to people on the street, in school, even in prison, to the guards, to policemen, and to other prisoners. One of the important truth clarification materials is the book called 9 Commentaries on the Communist Party. This is a book that shows the true evil nature of the Communist Party of China, and practitioners printed and handed out to Chinese people to show them how evil the party is. One of the very important projects, a very big project done by practitioners, is that the Falun Dafa practitioners help Chinese people to quit the CCP. This project is called Tuaidang, which in Chinese means to quit the party. And up until today, 367 million people have quit the CCP and its affiliated organizations. Another way of truth clarification is that practitioners use their artistic talents to move the heart of other people and show the truth about Falun Dafa. So here I would like to show you a short 4-minute video and a song that illustrates the misery of Chinese families who practice Falun Gong, and it's called Missing My Child. I will put the video. Can you see the video? Nie, dlaczego się zatrzymało? Yes, so this was one of the artistic visualizations of, like I said, the misery of Chinese families who practice Falun Gong. And so, coming to an end, in my presentation, I wanted to show that the persecution of Falun Gong is widespread, that it touches all areas of life and all layers of society. So here comes the question, why actually the CCP spends so much resources and effort to persecute Falun Gong so badly for so long? So in my understanding, it comes down to the evil nature of communism. From the Black Book of Communism, we know that communism is responsible for the deaths of 100 million people. So communism is inherently evil, and it wants to destroy the good in humanity. And that is the reason that it persecutes people that live by the principles of truthfulness, compassion, forbearance, people that are good and strive to be even better. And this also explains why the CCP wants to transform Falun Dafa practitioners to make them renounce their belief in truthfulness, compassion, forbearance, because actually the communism not only wants to destroy the body, but mainly the soul. So as the Ministerial for Advancing Religious Belief is held this year in Poland, I would like to make a few short remarks regarding this fact. Polish people understand very well the evil nature of communism. Poland was the country that stopped the spread of communism to the West in 1920 in the Battle of Warsaw. Then it was the first country to witness the cruelty of the concentration camps, creation of National Socialism, which is a communistic ideology. And then it fell under communism, and thanks to its solidarity movement, it initiated the fall of the Eastern Bloc of communism in 1989. So in my understanding, Poland is a symbolic place when it comes to the fight for freedom and fight against communism. I think that Poland has the moral authority and even moral obligation to condemn the crimes against humanity done by the CCP. So here I would like to appeal to the Polish government and politicians to make a stand against the persecution of Falun Dafa done by the CCP. Your voice matters, and actually CCP fears that you will use it, because as Ronald Reagan said, evil is powerless if the good are unafraid. So please, make Poland stand on the right side of the history. In my presentation, I used the following sources. First and foremost, I used the Minghui report, the 20-year persecution of Falun Gong in China, which is an excellent position for anybody that would like to dig deeper in the persecution. It presents many personal stories that show the big suffering of Falun Dafa practitioners in China. I used also the website minghui.org, which is a window for practitioners where they can share their experiences in cultivation and also about the persecution in China. I also use the website faluninfo.net, which is one of the primary sources of information when regarding the Falun Dafa community. And I also used the paintings of Falun Dafa practitioners, which collectively are called the Genshan Ren art. So everybody, I would like to thank you for listening to this introduction to the conference. And if anybody would have any question, please email me at mikolai@falundafa.pl. So once again, thank you very much. And we can go to the next speaker, which will be Jennifer Zhang. So Jennifer, the floor is yours. Jennifer, can you hear us? Sorry for all the technical inconveniences. Really, we are in the 21st century, but still the technology is not good enough to hold the webinar smoothly.
Hello?
Oh, perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, can I go ahead?
Yes, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I'll start in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. on April 13th, 2000. I suddenly heard loud bangs on the door of my house. Boom, boom, boom. Before I had time to figure out what had happened, a vicious-looking policeman was already in my room. He grabbed me forcefully and took me to the police station. Later, I asked, why? Why was I arrested while I was sleeping? And the police answered, because of your thoughts. Without any trial, I was then sent to a labor camp. I still remember the big sign at the Beijing female labor camp. It was like entering right into hell. From the very first moment, we were forced to squat motionlessly under the baking sun for more than 15 hours. Whenever someone couldn't endure it and fainted, electric batons were immediately applied on her so that she could be awoken and then continue to squat motionlessly. On the second day, 2 police guards dragged me from the cell to the courtyard, threw me on the ground, and applied electric batons all over my body until I lost consciousness. The torture that I suffered and saw was beyond terrifying. A young woman was tied to a chair. Several male police guards used electric batons to shock her head and private part until she lost control of her bowel movement. As a result, she couldn't walk for several months. Another method they used to torture females was to tie 4 toothbrushes together with sharp ends facing outwards. Then they pushed this thing into females' vaginas, twisted and twisted until they saw blood coming out. And the guards would also throw females naked into male prisoners' cells to have them raped repeatedly. But here I'll pause for a minute to explain how I ended up in this situation. In 1987, when I was 21 and a student at Beijing University, I believed that the Chinese Communist Party was the savior of China and the only force that could create a new and better China. The party was forever glorious, correct, and great. I believe it all, as that was what I and everyone around me had been taught ever since I was born. So I applied to join the party and was accepted, as I had always been very obedient and did well in my studies. In 1992, my daughter was born. I remember holding her in my arms and marveling at her beauty and perfection. It was the happiest moment in my life. Later on, I became pregnant again, and then, for the first time in my life, I met the other side of the party. In communist China, no one was allowed to have 2 children then. I was forced to do an abortion. I didn't want to, but had no choice. Because of the forced abortion and because of a medical accident I encountered during childbirth, I lost a lot of blood and was in critical condition twice. To make things worse, I caught hepatitis C through a blood transfusion, as they gave me contaminated blood. As a result, my health was totally ruined. I laid in a hospital for years without being able to work or to look at my daughter. I couldn't even witness her growth, as I was in a hospital alone, separated from her. July the 2nd, 1997 was a day that I will never forget. On that day, I received a set of Falun Gong books mailed to Beijing from my sister in my hometown. The books answered all my questions about life and inspired me so much that I decided to practice Falun Gong right away. Falun Gong involves living by 3 principles: truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance in one's daily life, and doing 5 sets of gentle exercises, including a meditation. After practicing Falun Gong for only 1 month, I found all my health problems had gone. I was full of energy, full of vitality and happiness. I had finally found the purpose for my life. I felt like a new person being reborn. Within 7 years since Falun Gong's first introduction to the public in 1992, it was estimated that 70 to 100 million people in China were practicing Falun Gong. Then, one day, suddenly things changed. The Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, could not accept the fact that people were believing in truth, compassion, and tolerance instead of the party, and that Falun Gong practitioners outnumbered CCP members. On July 20, 1999, the CCP started an overwhelming persecution of Falun Gong. People have been mass arrested, beaten, tortured, murdered, killed on demand for their organs, and thrown into camps without trial. I couldn't believe it was happening. I couldn't believe the always great, always glorious, and always correct party could do something this evil. Nor could I believe that I personally, would also become a target simply because I went to a park to practice meditation and because I live by truth, compassion, and tolerance. Then, on April 13th, 2000, at 2 p.m., the police came for me too. Maybe you are wondering, how can this be happening in this day and age? How can such a cruel regime be allowed to persecute good citizens? Why hasn't anyone done anything about it? The answer, like in all cases of cruel totalitarian regimes in history that wanted to legitimize the persecution of ordinary citizens, is propaganda. Ever since the persecution began, all media outlets, TV, radio, and newspapers were utilized to demonize Falun Gong and its practitioners. Hundreds of thousands of false reports bombarded the audience 24/7. It was said that we would cut open our belly, get up in the middle of the night, murder of children, or eat babies. Every lie told in history about a persecuted group became a fake news report on Falun Gong. The worst moment for me within this propaganda storm was when my 7-year-old daughter screamed at me, "I know Mom is a good person, but the TV says Falun Gong practitioners are banned. I don't know who to believe." Now, let's go back to the camp. After trying to withstand unimaginably cruel torture, both physical and mental, for more than 6 months, I finally collapsed. I broken down and signed a statement to guarantee that I would give up my belief. It was the worst moment in my life, with my thoughts being ripped and then taken away. I felt like becoming an empty shell in a human form, a non-human being without thoughts, soul, or free will, or human dignity. Worse still, I was forced to help the police to torture others. I can never forget a teenage girl who was taken to the camp one day before I was to be released. I had to watch over her to make sure she didn't fall asleep, as sleep deprivation was one of the main forms of torture. I had so much pity for her, since I knew too well what she would have to go through, yet I couldn't show any of my sympathy. After accomplishing this final task in another sleepless night, I was finally released in the morning. But I felt more imprisoned than ever, as I was expected to continue to live as a non-human being, an empty shell, an example of reform, and to continue to help the police to reform others. I'd rather die. I escaped from my home only 5 days after my release. 5 months later, I escaped to Australia. Slowly and gradually, I tried to gain back my thoughts, my soul, my free will, integrity, and human dignity. It was a long and difficult process. I had to overcome so many mental barriers and emotions, such as a sense of not being worthy, regrets, remorse, humiliation, shame, and disgrace. Ultimately, the determination to expose evil and help others enable me to stand on my feet again as a complete human being, capable of thoughts and actions again. I also wrote a book, Witnessing History, One Woman's Fight for Freedom and Falun Gong, and became the main character of the award-winning documentary, Free China, The Courage to Believe, to tell my story. And today I'm here to tell my story again. Humankind once vowed never again. But unfortunately, this unprecedented crime against humanity is happening again, and on a terribly large scale. And look at the world now, because we look the other way. When the CCP persecuted Falun Gong and thought it had nothing to do with us, the CCP was able to extend its persecution to Xinjiang, to Hong Kong, and to many other places in the world. And because some politicians, globalists, and elites in many other sectors are willingly corrupted by the CCP, as well as the specter of communism, have been able to infiltrate Western societies and quietly do damage. Look at the United States today, a country that is supposed to be the great beacon of liberty, is virtually experiencing a constitutional crisis because of a corrupt and a fraudulent election, and the CCP's shadow is definitely behind it. I hope that the great sacrifice and sufferings of millions of Falun Gong practitioners, Christians, Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, and many other persecuted groups will not go in vain while we discuss the 21 years of the CCP's human rights abuses here. Religious freedom is the most fundamental freedom of human beings, and many other freedoms are built upon this. This is also why the first thing the CCP wants to deprive people of is the freedom to have faith. Although on the surface, the communist bloc in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe has collapsed, the fight with the non-violent, the invisible communism is far from over. I hope everyone can see through the true evil nature of the specter of communism, stand up and stop it from achieving its final goal, which is to destroy humanity. It definitely won't stop at Falun Gong only. Thank you for listening to my story. Now, if I have time, let me quickly show you a few pictures to give you a visual idea of how brutal this persecution can be. I'm sorry if the images are graphic. If we feel disturbed by them, remember, Falun Gong practitioners and other persecuted people, millions of them in China, are still living through this every single day. Let me see if I can bring up the presentation. Can you see my my presentation? Yes. So the first we saw here is, just show you the idea of how many practitioners are practicing Falun Gong before the crackdown. So this is just one thing in the city in North China, Shenyang. Before the crackdown, people do this every day in the morning. And this is just one of the examples of how badly people were tortured in the labor camp. And so you can see they were tortured nearly to death. This is another example of her name is Gao Rongrong. She was shocked on her face, and these two pictures were taken secretly by Falun Gong practitioners, and who later risked their life to release the images to Minghui website. And Gao Rongrong was later tortured to death. So these are some of the other methods. All real person of police using extremely cruel torture measures to force Falun Gong to give up their beliefs. These are only some of the demonstrations, and all these people were real person who were persecuted to this kind of condition during this persecution, and including us very small babies, like the host has already introduced. So these are two images in Ma Sanja labor camp, secretly shot inside the camp by a practitioner, and he was later given 1 more year in the camp because he tried to release these. These were taken during the Beijing Olympics, but Olympics was still granted to Beijing while these things are happening during that period of time. So these are the rabbits I was forced to make in the labor camp for the international company. I know, I'm sure many of you know the brand Nestle. We were forced to make 10,000 of this piece. Each piece needs more than 10 hours and more than 30 procedures to make. We received nothing. At the labor camp, only received 5 or 4 cents for 1 piece for more than 10 hours of labor. That's why the very, very cheap made in China products can flood the West, because all these were made with blood and tears by Falun Gong practitioners. So next time when you see cheap products made in China, remember they could come from the labor camps and made by tears and blood by the inmates like myself. So finally, thank you. And these are where you can find me. I have a YouTube channel called Inconvenient Truth by Jennifer Zheng, and I have also a website, jenniferzhengblog1word.com, and you can also find me in all other major social media networks. If you search for my name, I think.
A mnie widać, czy nie? Bo ja włączyłam.
And
Widać.
thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you, Jennifer, for a wonderful speech. And now we can go to Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah? Okay. So I would like to give the floor to Ann-Sophie Alm, which is a parliamentarist for the Swedish Parliament. Ann-Sophie, the floor is yours. Can you hear us? Ann-Sophie, can you hear us? Having again some little technical problems. Widać mnie w ogóle? Okay, we will try to resolve the problems for Ann-Sophie. So maybe we can go to another speaker, to His Excellency the Ambassador of Taiwan to Germany, Professor Dr. Xie. Can you hear us? I would like to give you the floor.
Yes, I can hear. Can you hear me too?
Yes.
Should I deliver my speech first?
We can hear you.
You can hear me. It's on.
Yes, yes, it's on.
Yep.
Super, super.
Okay.
Bueno,
So
sí,
you
sí,
can
sí,
hear.
todo bien.
Okay. Okay. Somebody just sent a text. I can hear Professor Dr. Xie. Should I start it? Should I? Yaroshevich? Should I? Please give me the sign. Okay. We heard quite a lot about CCP. Maybe some people could ask what CCP are. These three alphabets, CCP. Usually we would think that is Chinese Communist Party. But in this case, after we have listened to the two speeches, we could say CCP could be cheating Chinese people, controlling Chinese people, or combating Chinese people. Good day, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, as the representative of Taiwan in Germany, I'm very much pleased as well as honored to have this chance to give a short comment titled Taiwan's Freedom of Religion as a contribution to the video conference today. And I would like to start my speech with a suggestion first. Maybe this conference should be titled not only Falun Dafa persecution in China then and now, but also Falun Dafa persecution in China now and then. Sorry, maybe it's not only now and then, it's rather around the clock. I take my suggestion back. In the last month, Taiwan has made a quite commendable job by managing pretty well to combat the spread of this COVID-19 with praiseworthy success. Yet at the same time, we also have been threatened badly by the Chinese military with both aircraft and warships, and that recently nearly around the clock. That's why I responded with the following answer sometimes when German people praise Taiwan concerning the combat of the spread of COVID-19 in front of me. And this is what I said to them. Both Taiwan and Germany have iPhone, but we Taiwan also have typhoon. And you have earthquake, we have earthquake. You have Corona, and we have China. And with China, I don't mean the Chinese people. I mean many, the Chinese Communist Party, the so-called CCP. And threatened, intimidated, and persecuted. Thus, the democratic Taiwan and the peaceful Falun Gong people seem to share a very similar fate, facing and confronted with the bullying monster-like superpower of the CCP. And that is the Chinese Communist Party, or as I said, cheating and controlling Chinese people. The other concept abbreviated in PLA, plays a significant role as well. PLA, that is the People's Liberation Army, in Chinese, 人民解放军. I can assure you by the word 解放 is not found at all, but the etymological fruit of the word liberation deserves our attention. Because liberation, liberate, liberty, is the other word in direct connection with freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion is so important. In French, you say freedom of speech, they say liberté d'expression. But in China, the freedom of expression used to become freedom of expression. The freedom religion has been crashed down since last decades in China, especially toward Falun Gong, but not only. Since the late 15th century, liberty means, and it should, for what we were talking about, the religious freedom, the freedom to practice Falun Gong, Falun Dafa. Since the late 15th century in Europe, liberty means free choice, freedom to do as one chooses. It is a state of being free from arbitrary, despotic, or autocratic rule of control of a dictator, or of, for example, of a party like the Chinese Communist Party. Since the late 15th century, what happens now, 500 years later in China, under the suppression, oppression, and persecution, a lot of people, like I just said, not only Falun Gong people practicing the people, but also Christians, and sometimes also Muslims and Buddhism. Ladies and gentlemen, what are we supposed to do? You know better than me. I would cite an aphorism of a statesman of the ancient Greece, Pericles. He said once, "The secret of happiness is freedom, and the secret of freedom is the courage." In German, Mut. In our language today, I would say the secret of freedom is courage, and freedom is not free. We don't take it for granted. You have to fight for it. We have to stick to each other. United we stand, divided we fall. And that shoots for everyone who want to protect their human rights, their freedom of speech, their freedom of religion. In China, Falun Gong is persecuted, sometimes even executed. In Taiwan, Falun Gong is accepted, protected, and respected, especially by the people who are aware of the risk Falun Gong people have been running to practice their belief in religion. The following, what I'm going to talk about, is an outline of the freedom of religion in Taiwan. By the way, Mr. Yarochevich, you were asking why is the Chinese Communist Party so keen to suppress, oppress, and persecute the Falun Gong people? One of the reasons is the dictatorship. They can say they cannot allow another group, another religious group, to have so many followers. They are scared, and they say to the Hong Kongese people and to Taiwanese people, one country, one system. And there's another saying in Chinese, 一山不容二虎. One country, two systems, but one mountain, only one tiger. And this tiger can only be the Chinese Communist Party. No other group who can gather, who can have so many followers like Falun Gong. So they cannot bear it. And that's a dictatorship. Okay. Taiwan is a very religious society. We have a total population of 23.6 million people, and according to a religious census conducted by the Ministry of our Interior a couple years ago, 35% of the population considers themselves Buddhist and 33% Taoist. The race of the population consists of Yiguandao, 3.5%, Christian Protestants, 2.6%, and Catholics, 1.3%. The number of Falun Gong practicing people in Taiwan are calculated around between 300,000 people to maybe 600,000 people. And here's also a note to the above-mentioned data. We also have some traditional folk religion. Okay, I will talk briefly about the religious belief of minority groups of indigenous people and migrant workers. Most of them, these migrant workers, most of them come from Southeast Asia countries like Indonesia, like Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam, and so on. According to statistics of the Ministry of Labor and the Council of Indigenous Peoples, the majority of the indigenous population of around 500,000 or 570,000, they are Protestant or Roman Catholic. In addition, over the past few years, we have seen more and more Muslims, Catholic, and Hindu friends who moved here from South and Southeast Asia. There are an estimated 711,000 foreign workers, primarily from Southeast Asia, just as I said. The largest single group of foreign workers is from Indonesia, consisting of approximately 271,500 persons who are predominantly Muslim. Workers from the Philippines, numbering approximately 155,000 persons, are predominantly Roman Catholic. We are pleased and proud to say that they enrich our society with their culture and religions, and the same contribution has the movement, the group of Falun Gong practicing Lord. They have also made a great contribution to the Taiwanese society. In short, diversity and freedom of religions has become an important and central part of the democratic way of the daily life in Taiwan. And today, you see in every cities, sometimes in some villages, in front of our national museums, in the neighborhood of the central Taipei railway station, or in some parks, people practicing Falun Dafa, some gymnastics, as much as they want, as early as they want, and there is really a very, very peaceful living together of all these people with Muslims, Buddhism, Catholic, and so on. Our constitution provides for the free exercise and equal treatment under the law of all religions, which shall not be restricted by law, except as necessary for reasons of protecting the freedom of others, imminent danger, social order, or public welfare. But it's certain there are cases like that. Religious organizations may voluntarily obtain an establishment permit from the Ministry of Interior. Registered religious groups operate on an income tax-free basis and can receive exemptions from building taxes on case-by-case basis. For now, more than 20 religious groups have establishment permits from Taiwan authorities. Okay. The MOE, Ministry of Interior statistics show a total of about 1 million followers registered with 12,300 temples and 2,839 churches of all religions in 2 years until 2008. Non-registered groups, however, are not eligible for the tax advantages available to registered religious organizations. We are encouraging, the government is encouraging people to make this reduction because they can have some advantages. But if they don't, it's okay, it's fine. Because of its unique status, Taiwan is not a party of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, but we enacted a domestic law in 2009 to adhere voluntarily to the covenant. And based on the aforementioned principles, Taiwan has long dedicated to promoting and practicing religious freedom. I have to point out again, for every groups, for every direction of religions, in the world. And the world has increasingly recognized our effort. More importantly, we endeavor to create a society of tolerance. 在理学的真善忍 in Falun Gong, the truth, the beauty, and the tolerance is the same value. More importantly, we endeavor to create a society of tolerance and mutual acceptance with regard to religious freedom. In last year, in March 2019, Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, TFD, a prominent foundation in promoting democratic values, not only participated in but also co-hosted a civil society dialogue on securing religious freedom in the Indo-Pacific region with American Institute in Taiwan and the International Religion Freedom. We together organized a lot of such events. In May last year, our President Tsai Ing-wen, Dr. Tsai, attended Taiwan International Religious Freedom Forum, expressing her hope for more accommodation for diverse religious beliefs and communication channels between different communities. The very fact that this forum was organized by local religious groups and NGOs, including Presbyterian Church in Taiwan, underscores Taiwan's long development on religious freedom. July 2019, we were honored to attend the U.S. State Department hosted Ministerial to advance religious freedom for the second time and voice our support and experience in promoting religious freedom. In the meantime, our government also committed to donating $200,000 to International Religious Freedom Foundation in total, which again demonstrates Taiwan's active engagement upon the agenda in advancing religious freedom. Moreover, our government appointed Pushin Dali as our first ambassador at large for religious freedom. According to the 2019 report on international religious freedom released by the U.S. State Department, Taiwan has greatly improved the Muslim travel environment by increasing trainings, Muslim-friendly hotels, and halal restaurants by 20% annually. Central and local governments continue to build new prayer rooms at public places such as train stations, libraries, and tourist destinations, and hope very soon some special rooms and space can be also destined for the Falun Gong people. Challenges and prospect. Unfortunately, freedom of religion is still under threat around the world. In some countries, religious organizations are being persecuted, religious statues and icons are being destroyed, religious leaders are forced into exile, and people are held in re-education camp. And as we just saw what Mr. Yarosevich and Jennifer Chen, what you showed us is really it's terrible. It cannot be, should be combated. We should fight back. We should try to stop them. Anyway, people are held in re-education camps, and means Uyghurs in China, and they are forced and break their religious taboos, and that's included Falun Dafa practicing people, Chinese. Taiwan chose to stand with those who were oppressed and suppressed and whose religious rights were taken away by authoritarian regimes. And that's why we have been striving to strengthen value-based partnerships with like-minded friends around the world. And Taiwan remains committed to creating a world where people are free from fear of persecution. I have to stretch fear of persecution or the fear of exile because their religion or ethnicity. Yeah. And during the interview by L'Agence France Presse, President Tsai Ing-wen called the international community to contain China by collectively advocating for freedom. President Tsai stated that voicing on international media, and she hoped to connect Taiwan and other countries to contain China's expansion of its sphere of influence and preserve democratic values shared across democracies. This is not only Taiwan's challenge, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen, President Tsai stated, but a challenge to the region. It's not only our challenge, it's a challenge to the region. And we have to pay more attention to what the CCP has been doing, persecuting Muslims, Christians, Falun Gong people, and some Buddhists, like I said. The world have to pay much more attention to what they have been doing, persecuting the people of nearly all the religions. In October 2018, the Vice President Chen Jianren was invited to participate in the canonization ceremony as Taiwan's Vice President, and Vice President Chen expressed his respect toward the Pope on behalf of President Tsai Ing-wen and all the Taiwanese citizens. He also pointed out that Taiwan and the Vatican have remained a close relationship and conducted fruitful discussions, whether it be humanitarian aids or cross-cultural religious exchange. And I would like to say here, Pope in the Vatican should also let the world know that no persecution of the Falun Gong people in China can be endured, should be punished or sanctioned. This year, after President Dr. Tsai got re-elected, in a letter she wrote to Pope Francis, she expressed our concern over China's persecution of religion. Again, Dr. Tsai wrote a letter to Pope Francis in Vatican, expressing our concern over China's persecution of religion, saying that Beijing aims to strengthen its democracy and freedom. Also, President Tsai listed Chinese actions that she said constitute abuses of power, abusing the right of religious freedoms. Nevertheless, Taiwan hopes for a peaceful resolution of its difference with the world, but the precondition is the Chinese Communist Party has stopped first its persecution of older people practicing religions, like I said, Christians, Buddhism, and Falun Gong people. Taiwan will continue to strengthen value-based partnerships with like-minded friends around the world to create a world where people are free from fear of persecution or the fear of exile because of their religion or ethnicity. As history shows, when more people live free from fear, countries will be more stable, peaceful, and prosperous. So let's work together and make this forum a beacon of true global religious freedom for our region, for the world. Especially, I want to say at the end of my speech, because Taiwan is quite an exception. During the last decades, in China, there has been a dictatorship with non-stop, and Taiwan was governed from 1949 to 1987, nearly 40 years, to be precise, 38 years, with martial law, and that means dictatorship. And during that time, we don't have freedom of speech, we don't have freedom of religion, we didn't have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of gathering, freedom of this and that. And now we have it. Since the lifting of this martial law in the year 1987, we started with our democratization, and we have reached today and with pride, I would like to point out, as a part of this great Chinese cultural circles and societies, Taiwan is nearly the last place where we can say the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom of human rights, and so on, can be not only be preserved, but also can be practiced. And so we don't take it for granted. It's our luck to have this happiness, to have this rights, enjoying human rights. But and I'm saying that not for myself, I'm saying that for our president, for our government, for the Taiwanese people, it is our right to protect our mentioned right, our freedom of religion, freedom, but it's also our obligation, it's our duty to support all the people in China, in Hong Kong, in Tibet, in Xinjiang, to help these people, supporting them, showing our solidarity, and to say to the Chinese Communist government, to tell them it is not correct when they say that the human rights, religion of speech, freedom of speech, freedom of religion are not compatible to the Chinese culture. Is simply wrong. Taiwan shows that the Chinese culture, together with our democracy, we can make it. We can provide the people living together with each other, everyone with their own religion. It's simply wrong when the Chinese Communist Party says it cannot be allowed to practice their religion, their beliefs, like Christian, like Buddhism and Falun Gong. So let's stick together, let's fight together, let's struggle together. Like I just said at the beginning, united we stand, divided we fall. And the last sentence I would like to cite aphorism of an old Greece, old statesman of the ancient Greece, Pericles. He said once, the secret of happiness, as I said, what I repeat, the secret of our happiness is the freedom. And the secret of freedom is courage. When we show our courage together, and we won't have to fear, the Chinese Communist Party would start to feel when we show them our courage, when you stick to each other. Thank you very much. I'm finished with my speech.
Can you hear me? Sorry. Okay. Can you hear us?
1, 2, 1, 2.
I think, yes, it's okay. Okay, so Mr. Ambassador, I would like to Thank you very much for your inspirational speech. And I would like to invite Ms. Anne-Sophie Alm to speak. Which she is a Swedish parliamentarist. Mhm. Please,
Thank you.
Anne-Sophie. Echo było, tak?
Can you hear me now? Can you all hear me now? Good. What happened was that my children came home and started all the computers. I'm really overwhelmed with all the stories that I just heard. So I really need to thank all of you that have spoken before me. I really don't think that I'm going to be able to keep this together because I'm really overwhelmed, but I'll try. Sweden is a small country, a really small country, far up north, and we are not more than just 10 million people all together. To put that into context, we are just as many as the whole city of Wuhan, or half the size of Beijing in our whole country. So we're kind of a small country. So why do I even think that my voice could be heard all the way to Beijing? And why do I even bother to stand up for human rights in China? Well, the answer is very simple. There is no other way. It is impossible to ignore the stories that you just heard, knowing that similar things are happening to other people right now. It is impossible to ignore. It's impossible not to do nothing when you know that such injustice, such cruelty is made upon people just because they have a different belief. It has been 21 years since this persecution began. The really hard question here is how this has been able to going on for 21 years and how it can still be ongoing. It's not only disgraceful to the CCP, it is shameful for the whole free world as I see it. The persecution of Falun Gong is inhuman, it's barbaric, and we must ask and demand a legal process to end it. I have read the reports of the Chinese tribunal in London. I've heard Jennifer's story. I've read the statements from the witnesses and I've seen the pictures. I saw maps of China where the largest prison were built wall to wall with the hospitals where organs transplants were done. I was so frustrated after that. How can we know about this and be doing nothing? I've been talking to people who still have their families inside of China, who fled China, and are so afraid of what will happen to their families that they don't even want to talk to them. And as a member of parliament, I've been sitting behind locked doors where no radio signals could come in or out and listen to highly classified information about China that takes over the free world bit by bit by buying our infrastructure, by buying our companies, our technologies, and even schools. Sweden has citizens who is put in jail in China for no reason, no more than being opponent to the CCP. The most famous case is Gui Minhai, who was kidnapped during a vacation trip in Thailand and put in jail with no trial. So Sweden might be a small country, but we do know what's happening in China. Because all of this together made me realize that to keep quiet, it's not an option. We need to raise awareness about the crimes against human rights, and that the CCP is conducting on a systematic and daily basis the crimes against human rights. And as Mr. Ambassador said, we need to do this together. And luckily, there are many of us who has come to that same conclusion. The Interparliamentary Alliance on China, the IPAC, which I'm a member of, is an international cross-party group of legislators working together towards reform on how democratic countries should approach China. We know that this is hard to bear, the burden of standing up for fundamental liberties and the integrity of the international order if one country stands alone. And therefore is our organization based on a belief that there is strength in unity and continuity. And we have 5 key areas, which is first, safeguarding international rules-based order. That means that China must be held to the standards of international legal order. And of course, upholding human rights. And number 3 is promoting trade fairness and strengthening security. And of course, democracies must develop complementary security strategies to really fight back and keep the free world free. And number 5 is protecting national integrity. That is that China should not be permitted to compromise the sovereignty or institutions through lending, through investment, or by any other means. The Interparliamentary Alliance on China, the IPAC, have a joint statement that over 700 legislators from over 30 countries have signed. In that joint statement, we urge the Chinese government to respect international norms and to immediately stop the persecution of Falun Gong in China, and to unconditionally release all detained Falun Gong practitioners and other prisoners of conscience. The persecution of minorities in China gives us a little hint about what will happen if the CCP will succeed in its goal to become the greatest empire in the world. The world is now suffering hard from the pandemic, and a lot of companies are struggling hard with their economy all over the world. We are now vulnerable and easy targets for unfriendly takeover. Luckily, some awareness has been raised. The free world is slowly being aware about the cruelness that the China Communist Party is doing to its own people. Right now, for example, as we speak, is another important seminar going on in another parliamentary intelligence security forum that I'm a member of. And the subject for that seminar is China's threat to national and economic security of democratic nations. I think that's a clear message to what it's all about. Another example is that our government in Sweden is trying to find ways to stop Chinese companies to invest in important Swedish infrastructure. The 5G network is not welcome. The Huawei is about to be banned. And hopefully there are also more countries that will follow. The free world, the free and democratic world, have to stand up against the Communist Party of China. The international community should speak up for more forcefully and more publicly in denouncing the Chinese regime for its suppression of human rights. The United States of America and Europe has a special we need to do this together. We need to stand united in this and stand up together with Hong Kong and with Taiwan, because it is, like Mr. Ambassador said, it's our duty to fight for all people's right. So we all have more work to do. On July the 20th, 1999, that's been 21 years. 21 years, it's a very, very long time. It has passed that since the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners first started. I want to raise awareness of the many Falun Gong practitioners who has been detained in re-education through labor camps, in prisons or other detentions facilities as prisoners of conscience. There have been reports of torture. We have seen them here today. There have been reports of killings, and there have been reports of illegal organ harvestings. These reports must be taken extremely serious and be tried in international courts. And this is why this seminar is so important. This is why your voice is so important, and my little voice from a little country up north. The Communist Party of China needs to know what the free world wants. And we want this persecution and all other persecutions to end. It needs to stop right now. We must continue to work and hope that China will one day respect rule of law, the freedom of speech, freedom of having the right to your own mind, to choose your own beliefs. Falun Gong is friendly and peaceful. Truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, tolerance. Maybe this is exactly what the world needs right now to get us through this pandemic and to make sure that human rights is also respected in China. Thank you.
Yeah, Anne-Sophie.
Nikolai, I am
Yes.
finished with my...
Can you hear us?
Yeah. Anne-Sophie. Thank you very much for your very interesting and motivating speech. I would like now to invite Jiang Yanhua to speak about her experience regarding the persecution. Jiang Yanhua, the floor is yours. A little bit of patience, which is also a part of the practice of Falun Dafa. So in a moment.
Я тут долго не слышу.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yes,
Okay,
please go ahead.
I will do the translation for Yanhua.
On mam to samo. Co by się dzieje?
感谢你们邀请和给我这个机会，讲述我在中国受迫害。
Thank you for having me here and giving me this opportunity to share my persecution experience in China.
我叫张艳华，出生于黑龙江。我是1993年7月开始练法轮功的，当时我25岁。我以前患有遗传性冠心病、脑神经痛、痛经，还有痔疮，去医院治不好，我就尝试练其他的气功，但都没有用。1993年7月的一天，我们当地的气功协会卖李洪志师傅代工报告会的票，我就买了票，听了李洪志师傅讲的法轮功，觉得这是有益于健康和提高道德水平的，所以又继续参加了李洪志师傅办的7天的法轮功学习班，开始练法轮功了。不到2个月，我的身体就发生了很大的变化，冠心病的状态消失了，心态也更平和了，给家人带来了温馨和幸福，给单位增加了效益，为国家减少了医药费。经过2年多的时间，在我的家乡，从开始几个人练法轮功，发展到1000多人练法轮功。
My name is Yanhua Zhang from Heilongjiang, northern part of China. I started to practice Falun Gong back in July 1993. That time I was about 25 years old. I had a hereditary coronary heart disease, menstruation pain, and hemorrhoids. I often went to hospitals, but it couldn't be cured. I practiced other Qigong to try, but it didn't help. One day in July 1993, I saw our local Qigong association was promoting to attend the 7 days lecture from Master Li in my own city. I bought tickets and joined the lecture, and after hearing the lecture, I know it's benefiting the health and improving one's morality. So I started to practice Falun Gong. Within 2 months, my health became better, and my heart disease was gone, and I had a more calm mind. It brought more warmth and happiness to the family, brought more work efficiency to my job, and saved some medical expense for the country. From a few people practicing in my hometown, within 2 years' time, there were over 1,000 people practicing Falun Gong.
我一共被关押过3次，第一次是2001年到2008年，被关押在哈尔滨女子监狱。那时我到一个同修家里帮忙折新印的李洪志师傅的心经文。晚上10点左右，一群警察破门而入，冲进同修家里， 一进门就开始打我们、抓我们。判刑前，警察让我写污蔑法轮功的东西，声明不再修炼法轮功。如果我不写，就会被判刑7年。我没有写。其他没有修炼法轮功的人不明白我为什么不写。对他们来说，在中共的体制下撒谎、说假话都是很正常的。他们说，你一个小小的女子被判刑7年，你能受得了吗？我说，法轮功教我们做好人，讲真话，我不能污蔑法轮功，因为我体会到了法轮功的好。
I was detained in total 3 times. I was first detained and imprisoned at Harbin Female Prison in July 2001 till 2008. I went to a practitioner's home to help with folding the printed new lecture from Master Lee. Around 10 p.m., a group of police stormed inside the home and started to beat us and arrested us. Before the sentence, the police asked me to write something which less the Falun Gong and announced not to practice it anymore. If I don't write it, I will be sentenced for 7 years. I didn't write. The others who didn't practice Falun Gong couldn't understand it, why I didn't do it. For them, it's very normal to lie. And that person says, "You're such a small young lady. Can you bear the 7 years imprisonment?" Since Falun Gong teaches us truthfulness, we cannot lie unless the Falun Gong, since I experience how good it is.
被关进监狱后，只要我们不配合他们污蔑法轮功，不声明停止修炼法轮功，他们就继续对我们施加压力、酷刑折磨、精神摧残，让我们身心俱疲。每次他们都把我折磨到快要死了才停止。当我的身体刚刚有所恢复的时候，他们就又开始对我酷刑折磨。就在这样的被迫害中，我在监狱里度过了7年。
After imprisonment, as long as we don't cooperate with them to last the Falun Gong, not denounce practicing Falun Gong, they will continue to give you pressure, torturing you, break you physically and mentally. Every time they torture me till I'm almost died, and then they stopped. When I'm not even totally cured from the torture, they start to torture me again. This kind of persecution continued for 7 years.
酷刑的目的是逼迫我们放弃信仰法轮功，污蔑法轮功。酷刑的方法包括长时间用手铐铐住手腕，然后把脚离地吊起来，冷冻，一天罚站10多个小时以上。我曾被7天7夜在没有吃饭没有喝水的情况下，把手反铐在床脚上，不让睡觉，2天2夜不让上厕所。我曾经被关在一个房间里，从早上5点到半夜，门和窗户全部被糊住，被强迫坐在小凳子上，眼睛必须直视，身体一点也不允许动。看污蔑法轮功的录像，录像的声音放大到最大，大到头晕耳鸣。10几个犯人和2、3个警察围攻我，污蔑法轮功，羞辱我，折磨我，目的是错乱我们的精神，让我们任他们摆布。他们说，如果你放弃练法轮功，说法轮功不好，说你被骗了，我们就不让你遭这个罪，我们就让你睡觉休息。有很多法轮功学员比我遭受的折磨更严重。在同一个监狱里，我知道的大约有5到6位法轮功学员被折磨致死。
The purpose of torture is to force practitioners to give up the belief and to last the Falun Gong. The torture methods include handcuffed wrists and hanging up for a long time, freeze, stand still for over 10 hours a day, sleep deprivation for 7 days without food and drink while handcuffed to the bed, or not letting you go to the toilet for 2 nights. I was once locked up in a room from 5 a.m. to midnight. The window and door were all covered with paper. or forced to sit on a small stool. My eye must look straight, and my body wasn't allowed to move at all, and I had to watch video that slander Falun Gong. The sound of the video was turned to the loudest, make you feel dizzy and tinnitus. A dozen inmates, together with 2 and 3 police, surrounded me and defamed Falun Gong, humiliated me, and tortured me. The purpose is to confuse my mind, to just do what they ask. They said, if you give up Falun Gong and say it's not good, say you have been deceived, we won't let you suffer this. Then we will let you sleep and rest. Many Falun Gong practitioners have suffered more severe torture than me. At the same prison, I know about 5 to 6 Falun Gong practitioners who were tortured to death.
在监狱里强行给我们法轮功验血，只有法轮功学员才被验血，其他囚犯不被验血。我们必须去接受验血，他们强迫我们去，因为那个时候我们在监狱里还没有听说过活摘法轮功学员器官的事情，所以对于他们强行给我们验血很疑惑。后来监狱里的一个曾经练过法轮功的工作人员给我们带来了一份有关活摘法轮功学员器官的真相的小册子，才明白他们为什么给我们验血，感到了恐怖血腥的气氛，更加看到了中国共产党的邪恶。
In the prison, we were forced to have our blood tested. Only Falun Gong practitioners were tested. Other prisoners were not tested. We must go for this test, and they forced us to go. Because that time we didn't hear about organ harvesting yet, so we were confused about their forced blood test. Later, a prison worker who practiced Falun Gong before brought us a small brochure with information about forced organ harvesting from Falun Gong practitioners. Then we understood why the test, and we felt terrified in a very bloody atmosphere. We saw even more the evilness of the Chinese Communist Party. 因为由于时间关系，我们会继续练英语。Okay, because of time, I will continue to read her experience sharing. One time, when they were torturing me, the police threatened me and said, "If you don't cooperate, I'll take you to be live organ harvested," and hinted me that they will torture me even more severe. This was in 2005 or 2006. Another way they use is to use my family to persuade me to stop practicing Falun Gong. Once they forced my mother and sister to convince me to listen to the Communist Party. Another time, they asked my husband and my daughter to go to prison to see I'm acting on stage. They were acting a story lecturing Falun Gong. After watching this, they wanted them to go to transform me. Transforming means let me denounce practicing Falun Gong. I felt very sad. I have already lost freedom, and seeing my family being harassed and forcing them to persuade me is something very painful for me. Actually, my family didn't want to do this. They know how benefiting Falun Gong is for one's mind and body. One time, my mother and sister and daughter went to prison to visit me. Since they didn't want to cooperate with them to persuade me, they were not allowed to see me. My mother is already old, and it took them about traveling 1 day by train to go to see me. They didn't see me and went back home sadly. In her heart, she was suffering the pain from worry about me and missing me. Later, my mother had some mental problem because she was missing me so much. When she saw a person on the street and thought it was me, my mother was calling my name. Although she bought a vase at home and regarded the vase as me, she often talked to the vase. Her health became worse and worse, with many illnesses. After 7 years, I was released. It was 2008. Since I was not so-called transformed by them, I was fired from job. They keep harassing me after I went home. They sent people to my home to talk with me, and they were monitoring me. They also threatened my husband that if I don't get transformed, he had to divorce with me. otherwise he would get fired from his job. So we divorced. I've heard some practitioners were detained after releasing, so I was afraid I would be arrested again. Because the torturing in the prison makes me feel that life is worse than death. In the early of 2009, my daughter and I left home and stayed somewhere else. Since the police followed us, we were moving all the time. Tracking method is like tapping phone calls or following other practitioners to find me. The second time I was detained was in 2015. It was my brother who bribed the police, and I was hunger striking, so they released me after 2 days. The third time was in 2019. I was detained because they thought I was hanging up banners with the text Falun Dafa is good outside, and they've probably tapped a phone call from a fellow practitioner mentioning my name. Then the police followed the fellow practitioner, so they found me and arrested me. During I was in detention center, they told me, since I was in prison before, this time they would sentence me more years. They didn't talk about any law and legal procedure. I didn't want to be imprisoned, so I was hunger striking for more than 100 days. During this period, I was forced blood tested for 2 times. When I was in prison in 2001, in the beginning, I still had hope in the Chinese Communist Party. I thought they just didn't know the truth about Falun Gong. If they know that Falun Gong is benefiting the health, improving one's morality, it's beneficial to people, to society, and to the government without any harm, they won't persecute us anymore. But it was not the case. When I was detained for 7 years, I was always trying to clarify the truth to the police. But the answer I got from the police was, "We know Falun Gong is good. You didn't break the law. CCP tell us to do what we do. We do whatever they told us." All this let me know that CCP is an evil regime ruling by lies, violence, and deception. Falun Gong teaches truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. It makes CCP difficult to rule with their own ideology. It will let people realize the evilness of their way of ruling and so losing power. So we understand the CCP is based on fake evilness, and fighting won't stop the persecution of Falun Gong, which is based on peaceful principles. CCP never talks about law, so there is no hope. It's desperate for the Chinese people. All inmates know that practitioners are good people. Since Falun Gong teaches us truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, although those inmates and police treat us badly, I had no any anger or hate toward them. I think they are very pitiful because in prison they didn't learn how to be a good person. Instead, they were used by the CCP police for their own interests. They hurt Falun Gong practitioners who are kind people in their hearts. So they are not only did not become better person in prison, in turn, they become more selfish and indifferent. The police has become more ignorant of the law and abuse human rights. So I feel there is no hope but despair in living under the Chinese Communist regime. I hope more people learn about the cruel persecution of Falun Gong in China by the CCP and help to stop the persecution. Thank you. Nikolai will finish the speech. Thank you.
Me?
Tak.
Thank you, Jianhua, for sharing. Can you hear me? Sorry. Okay, so everybody, due to technical reasons, and also because the conference was prolonged, we would like to make the Q&A questions session to be done through email. So if you have any questions, please email us. I will also write in the chat remind the email to which you can write us. So I would like to thank all of our wonderful guests for attending the conference. Your speeches were very inspiring. I would like to thank all attendees also to attend our conference. And hence the conference has ended. So once again, thank you very much. And also, if you would like to help in any way, if you can, please help raise the awareness of the persecution of Falun Dafa in any way you can. Thank you and goodbye. Bye.
Bye-bye. Nice to meet you, and we have to work together and fight together.
Thank you.
Very nice to meet you.
Very much.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Have a nice
Thank
day.
you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Yep.